Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden responding today to those reports, calling the president's supposed remarks disgusting.
When my son volunteered and joined the United States military as the Attorney General and went to Iraq for a year, won the Bronze Star and other commendations, he wasn't a sucker. The servicemen and women he served with, particularly those who did not come home, were not losers.
Biden says that if the reports are true, Trump should apologize to every parent of a fallen soldier. For more on this, let's bring in Yahoo News White House correspondent Hunter Walker, and he joins me from Washington. So, Hunter, tell me just, a little bit more about the article that claims that he made these comments about the military and why he didn't want to go to the cemetery.
Mm-hmm. Well, this article really was positioned as sort of an examination of Trump's attitudes towards the military. And along with this incident about the cemetery in France, it recounts a trip Trump made to Arlington, the cemetery here in Washington. And specifically, he was visiting the section of the cemetery for recent war dead. With John Kelly, who later became his chief of staff. And John Kelly actually had a son who was buried there in Arlington. They were visiting his grave, and the article says Trump was wondering, quote unquote, what's in it for them, and implying that he didn't, understand why anyone would do military service, given the relatively low reward for the high risk. So in general, the article was saying that Trump, doesn't really understand why people would serve, has a purely transactional view of those things, and also that he has a negative view of soldiers who've been captured or injured. That's the claim in the article.
Yeah, and so let me ask you a little bit more about that. From what I understand, there isn't any attributable source. These were all anonymous sources, so which is interesting in and of itself. But would it be believable in terms of people's reaction, because it would be in keeping with some of the comments he's made in the past?
Yeah, I was about to say, all of these incidents that I just described are attributed to anonymous sources by The Atlantic. However, the story also notes that Trump has made public comments a little bit along these lines, specifically when he was feuding with the late Arizona Senator John McCain, who is very known for a stint he spent as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And Trump said, "I prefer the people who aren't captured." And he repeatedly called McCain a loser. So the president, I would not be remotely surprised for him to make remarks like that. At the same time, there are aspects of the story that I think are questionable. By accounts of reporters who were there on that trip, it really was, the trip to the cemetery really was canceled due to rain. So that detail doesn't entirely seem to make sense, but there's a version of events where you could say, okay, this trip was canceled due to rain. As they were debating whether to cancel it, he could have made these comments. But there certainly is
and I guess
a bit in the story that can be questioned.
I guess they were saying, too, that the chopper, I guess, couldn't fly because of that rain, but the cemetery was only about an hour outside of Paris. Let me ask you about Trump's defense on this. He says it's absolutely fake, it didn't happen. And he said there are people who are there that confirm that it's fake. What have we heard on that?
Well, Trump has, first off, really actively tried to refute this story. We saw him talk to the press outside the White House last night when he was returning from Pennsylvania. And as someone who's covered this administration since it began and has covered a couple of the president's trips, I don't believe he had ever addressed reporters when coming into the White House at night before. He also brought reporters into the Oval Office today and criticized it again. The reason for that is pretty clear. This is, a big part of his pitch to voters has been that, no one has taken care of the military like he has. His campaign has very specifically done outreach to veterans. It should be a key constituency for him. So we're seeing this aggressive pushback. And then, as you were alluding to, a couple of loyalists to President Trump, notably former White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, have said, that this wasn't true. It did strike me, though, that, Sarah Sanders's comment was essentially saying, I was there when he didn't say this, which is kind of, a hard thing to prove. They're also really pointing to the tell-all book by John Bolton, the former national security advisor. And in that book, Bolton, who certainly is no fan of the president, describes the trip being canceled due to rain. However, and Bolton also says that the drive was really not feasible to bring the presidential motorcade in a foreign country for that long of a drive. But that being said, Bolton was
For
not
an hour. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, but Bolton was not actually there. So, even if he, is confirming what we've heard from other reporters that this trip was canceled due to rain, neither he or Sarah Sanders, I think, are people who could say they were with the president 100% of the time through this whole thing. And also, quite frankly, I mean, we're in a situation where the president has told a record number of lies. People in his administration have repeatedly lied, notably Sarah Sanders. So they really don't have the credibility and capital to push back on something like this as they otherwise might.
Okay, Yahoo News White House correspondent Hunter Walker, good to have you on. Thank you.